Hi, everybody, and welcome to our fourth edition of the Western Michigan University Cooley Law School's Community Conversation Series. Again, I'm Paul Zelensky, the facilitator for this conversation. We'll start with a short introduction, and then we'll ask our guests to make some comments, and then we're off and running. We're going to start a discussion today about how activism can affect change, and then we will then tie the role government has in managing a public health crisis. Our special guest today is our president and dean and professor, James McGrath. By virtue of being a conversation, we're applying your participation, and we encourage you to ask questions by posting them in the chat while President and Dean McGrath is commenting. As you know, we continue to see people of all races hitting the streets to protest the Black Lives Matter movement and to call for all of us to be activists in support of anti-racism. We remain in the midst of a several-month pandemic, which again appears to be picking up steam. And we're fortunate today to have President Dean McGrath, who was in a great position to comment on the interplay between activism and public health. In addition, I think many of you know that in addition to having a law degree from Howard, President McGrath has a master's degree in public health from Harvard. And you can read more about President McGrath in the chat. We'll post his bio there. In a recent interview with the City Pulse, President McGrath, and I'm going to start sharing our screens here a little bit, or stop sharing my screen, and so we can see everybody's faces. In a recent interview with the City Pulse, you outlined your history of activism, particularly around the AIDS HIV crisis in the 1980s. What do you remember most about that time in your life and the movement to get the government and the public to be more responsive to the HIV/AIDS crisis? And I know you want to start off with some comments, but if you want to make an initial comment, that would be great.
Great. And I'm going to answer your question in a kind of a roundabout way, as is my want, because I have some slides queued up here. I'm going to go through them. And most of it is just a big ego trip, apparently. But I think it'll give you an idea about what I'm about to talk about. So let me just see if I can share my screen. And can we all see the big W? Yes. Okay, great. So, as Paul mentioned, I went to Howard University for law school, and here's a picture of me walking up to the stage with my hood in hand, and here's me even happier on the way back with my hood on. Was placed by my favorite professor, and really happy moment for me. I didn't go to law school till I was almost 40 years old, so it was a really proud moment for me. I went to work at a medium-sized firm in Connecticut called Shipman and Goodwin, a very fortuitous name that was over 120 years old. Clearly the building wasn't that old, and it looks like a ship, so that worked out really well for them. I was only there a few years when I really felt the need to go back and continue my education. As we'll see later on, I became a grassroots public health activist, and I wanted to get my actual degree in public health. So as Paul mentioned, I went to the Harvard School of Public Health. After that, I knew I wanted to stay in school the rest of my life, and that's very expensive. So I learned to be a better teacher by going to the Temple University School of Law. I got my master's in law degree. You can see it there on the little picture if you like. And yes, I do love graduations. I know a lot of my friends, my own husband does not like going to them. He refused to go to his own PhD ceremony, and I had to bribe and extort and threaten him because it is one of my favorite things. If you'd asked me a little while ago, the highlight of my career, it would have been the year I spent in China as a Fulbright scholar. This is me taking a picture here. I'm not going to bore you with them, but I have 50 pictures of everybody that came to visit me in front of this statue. Everybody had to have their picture taken in front of it. This is the school where I taught. It was called the Beijing University School of Chemical Technology. And they have a very small law department. And I increased it by over 30% when I was there. I get to travel all around the country, some for fun, but mostly to do these speeches on, US law, about my scholarship. And everywhere I went, they put up these big signs. This is one of the smaller ones. Usually they were much bigger than me. And because I guess I have an excessive ego, I have a picture with me in front of all of them. I was the original Tiger King. You weren't aware of that. Actually, this is very cruel. This poor animal, you can hold him for like $3. His parents were not really happy about it. That's part of my trip to China. But that was a real highlight for sure. But now clearly, I am just really loving my new job here. as the president and dean of Western Michigan University Cooley Law School. I have told everybody that will listen that my family is continuing to change. This is our last foster child we had, Tristan. He luckily went back to his parents because that's the whole point of fostering. Although it was kind of sad for us because we really did enjoy his company. Here's the original foster kids I had in Texas. And you can see the 13-year-olds are not really crazy about me. If you can see I don't know if you can see it in the upper right-hand corner, the look on her face is just one of complete disdain. This is Joshua. He was with us for a while, took his first plane ride and decided to fly it. And then finally we met Miss Kinsey, who we ended up actually adopting. So this guy here is just a great guy. He was on the faculty at Texas A&M, and he was also a judge, and he officiated at our adoption. He just passed away about 2 weeks ago. Really great guy. And this is our most recent exchange student, Matisse, from France. And he was just really a great big brother to Kinsey. And so we really enjoy a family that has these flexible boundaries. We are just finishing up our licensing in Michigan. We hope to continue to be foster parents, and eventually another exchange student should come live with us. So that's our family. That's Kenny the dog. There's 5 cats who just refuse to have their photos taken. So I'm from Rhode Island, and you probably know Rhode Island is the smallest state in the Union. And here's some interesting facts about Rhode Island. The state flag has the word hope under this anchor. And that word hope is the entire state motto. And so I've been flying the Rhode Island flag during the COVID epidemic, and people stop and say, "Where did you get that flag? That's so great. The hope message is really," I said, "It's just a state motto of Rhode Island." Interesting fact, we have the only state bird that you can legally eat because it's a chicken. Anyway. Yeah, there you go. That's me as a youngster. Never really did get a good haircut ever in my life. It's not just something new. Right after high school, I went into the Air Force, and I'm not proud of this, but I will admit it because I think it's important to some people who may have messed up in high school. I did poorly in high school. We had 803 people in my graduating class, and I was number 800. I really kind of messed up, and a lot of it had to do with my internal angst. I knew there was something different about me. I didn't know what it was, and I was acting out in some horrible ways. This is the only picture I have of me in the Air Force. I'm in the Philippines taking a picture. Someone's taking a picture of me. I don't have a lot of older pictures. I've moved a lot in my life. I lose a lot of them. So anyway, let's talk about what happens after the Air Force. So I tell anybody who listens that I went back to college, and I was studying theater, and I got a job doing children's theater. And although it was a fantastic job, it was fun, it didn't pay the bills. So I was in a band, and we have some vinyl out there that you probably cannot find, which is probably a good thing. Here, my band is in a compilation of bands that played at this club, Parallel Fifth, and a very serious song about nutrition called Carrots and Peas. And you see my name up there. Not one of my proudest moments. But even though it was a horrible song, we did it again, appeared on their next record. And this time we conned a local Congressman Eddie Beard, to appear on stage with us to do the song Rhode Island. He's a one-term congressman. I'm not sure we played a part in that or not, but he would shout out these things during the song on cue. And yeah, so we actually have an EP out, which has the song Rhode Island if you're interested in it. Here it is. But it doesn't have Eddie Beard on, it's just us. I ended up opening my own nightclub, and I really enjoyed it. It was kind of fun, and I wanted it to be a club where only bands that wrote their own music could play, because my band did original songs. And so it was really fun, really fulfilling, and it was a financial flop. I kept it open, but barely. But it was a lot of fun. I had to really make some changes to make it a successful business, and that's what I did. So the most popular nights were the nights where we had a DJ and no bands, but I had to pivot. So it gives you a little taste of Rocket. That's the crew. I hired a professional to come in and take a photo of us. And all I have from it is this SX70 Polaroid with horrible color. Anyway, really fun time in my life. Everybody that worked there was a musician of some sort. So we always had a band of, just a fun band for every time we changed the decor. And this was during our Las Vegas night, and we did kind of a lounge lizard band. And that's me playing the part of Tony Permanent during our lounge act. You can't really see it, but the guys behind are sitting behind those little bandstand things. It's really kind of fun. So at this point in my life, I'm an openly gay man, and everybody thinks that I'm going to open a gay nightclub, but it wasn't. It was a straight club, and we had bands. But we, as I mentioned, when we first started out, the business was not doing well. And so I was only open 3 nights a week, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. And on Tuesday nights, because I was living in the club, it was probably illegal, but I didn't know it at the time. I would have friends over on a Tuesday night just to, hang out, and I put a bucket of beer out. We had monitors all over the place. And so we could watch a movie, and it was kind of fun. But after a while, people kept bringing other people. And soon there was 50 or 60 people virtually in my living room drinking beer for free. And it dawned on me, it might be fun to have a gay night. But not that I was closeted, but I didn't want the club to get a reputation as being a gay club, because we're mostly not. So you had to have this invitation to get in. And there is no Peter O'Hara. And I did that as a joke, but it was really good because it became the most popular night of the week. And people would say, how do I get in? So you have to get an invitation from Peter O'Hara. It's his party. I can't help you. And so I could keep people out as I wanted to. But later on, we dropped it because it was paying the bills. And then we had another night on Thursday, which wasn't particularly a gay night, but everybody came. And it became kind of a very cool place where people didn't care if you were gay or not, which was pretty amazing for the mid-1980s. So while I have this club, really horrible things are happening. The AIDS crisis hits. And at first, we don't know what it is. And it's called gay cancer because only gay men seem to be getting it. And then we find out it's compressing immune systems. And so they called it gay-related immunodeficiency disease, so GRID. And then a lot of Haitian men come down with it. And so we don't know what to call it. It ends up being acquired immune deficiency syndrome. Later on, we just called it HIV disease. And so we started doing direct care for people, doing fundraisers for people who were stricken with the disease. But it wasn't much that we could do, and people were dying quickly. And I realized that the government's inaction was killing people. The government wasn't doing enough to fight the disease. So I became involved in a group in New York called ACT UP. And ACT UP was born out of just a sense of, just rage that nothing was being done. If you compare the government's approach to Legionnaire's disease, which affected fewer than 20 people, and they leapt into action, spent millions of dollars to cure that disease right away. And what happened with HIV disease, it's criminal. And so I got involved in direct action. And what ACT UP was really good at, in my mind, was to shine a spotlight on the problems. We couldn't really change things ourselves. We can't suddenly create drugs, but we can shine a spotlight on the government's inaction and get them to do things. And we were fairly successful. I find, I was looking through photos because I don't have many of my own. I'm finding them online, and this one AIDS death every half hour just bowled us over. And it was the government was really doing nothing at the time. And you know what the figure is today? It's 5,500 people a day globally are dying of HIV disease still. It's still a scourge. Silence equals death is the big slogan that we used, the motto, the chant. It was all purpose. And the group Grand Fury, which is the name of the artist wing of ACT UP, came up with this very simple pink triangle inverted to look like a pyramid. And if you don't know it, the pink triangle was the symbol that the Nazis used to identify homosexuals in the concentration camps. You know that the Jewish people were forced to wear a gold Star of David. The homosexuals, as they call them, were forced to wear a pink triangle. And yeah, one big thing about ACT UP is we ended up getting arrested a lot because you can't expect the media to come watch you protest. They want some reason to come, and people getting arrested is always a reason to show up. And so we did a lot of nonviolent civil disobedience and a lot of art projects. This is just a little public health kind of thing, telling people that kissing doesn't kill, greed and indifference do. People really thought that the disease happened because two men were kissing each other or two women. And if you lived through this time, you would know this is a takeoff on a very popular clothing line, the Colors of Benetton, that had very controversial posters. And we just took it up another step. And it's an unusual size, because what we would do with these is we would go into subway trains, go into buses, and these are the exact size of the ads you see in buses and subway trains, and put them in there. We actually had to start printing about 3 times as many as we wanted to use because they were so beautiful. Our activists were taking them home and keeping them in their houses where they were doing no good other than making the place look great. Keith Haring, very famous activist, did this poster for us that we did sell and we did use all over town to, alert people to our fight and what we were doing. And again, we sold these because the activists were just keeping them instead of putting them up because they're so beautiful. Keith Haring shows up in my story in a little bit as well. So I personally was arrested 13 times. And I don't have photos of every one of them. And I don't even remember all of them, to be honest with you, because some of them are so similar. But let me just tell you about a few of them in context of what happened during this time period. So the Wall Street protests, that was one of the very first protests where ACT UP took over the streets in New York and just refused to move. And eventually we all got arrested and taken to jail. And usually we got out the same day. You have a problem if you have a Rhode Island driver's license versus a New York driver's license. Sometimes you would be kept overnight, but usually protesters get out the same day because we weren't doing anything violent and we weren't destroying any property. Here's one of my favorite ones, and this is shut down the FDA in Rockville, Maryland. And I don't think you can see it, but up on the overhang there where it says silence equals death, to the left is a poster with a guilty over it. And on the right, you see another one. On the right is President Bush, the first Bush. On the left, that's actually Anthony Fauci. And this is before he became really involved with what we called the Drug and Treatment Group. It later became TAG, a separate group outside of ACT UP. And they were really a dedicated group of activists who knew so much about the disease that they would actually have to educate their physicians about what was going on. They were so amazing that Dr. Fauci worked with them, and they developed a drug approval system called parallel tracking. And parallel tracking was really important because people who are dying quickly do not want to take a placebo. They want the real drug or they don't want to participate. But if you don't have people taking the placebo, you can't do a controlled drug trial. So it was a kind of a catch-22. So they did a parallel track where there were people willing to be in an actual trial and people who would try anything. And one of my favorite activists, you'll see a picture of him in a while, Peter Staley. He, this was a time when people found out they had HIV because testing wasn't available prior to like 1987. And people would die within a year or two. And this gentleman is still alive. And there's a great movie about him called, oh my goodness, don't ask me out, How to Survive a Plague. It's amazing. It's on Apple iTunes if you want to see it. It's an amazing story. This is one of my favorite arrests. You will not find me in a picture anywhere. So we needed to get people up on that overhang to put up these signs. And so there was a huge group of people, and we're talking thousands of people. And I'm standing there in front of this crowd, and someone comes over and says, listen, we've got to get people up on that overhang, but the police are standing right there. I want you guys to run across this field and divert them. If you start running, they're going to start chasing you. And I'm like, all right, let's do this. And so this guy says, I'll blow a whistle and go. He blows a whistle and 2 people go, and I'm one of them. So I'm one of the very first people arrested. And but it was just enough to get the guy up there to put the sign up. That was Peter Staley. This is probably the most notorious ACT UP action I did at this point in my life. And this was where we went to the New York Stock Exchange. And Borough's Welcome is the company that made AZT. It was the only drug that was approved by the FDA to fight HIV disease. And they were charging $10,000 per person per year, which is pretty outrageous by today's standards. But back then it was like 5 times the price of any other drug. Not only that, they didn't even develop the drug. It was developed by the US government as an anti-cancer drug, but it was deemed too toxic for human beings. But by controlling dosage, it showed efficacy. When they first started giving it to people with HIV, they were giving a dose that was so high that it was actually harming people as well. But it was helpful in suppressing this retrovirus. So we were trying to get Burroughs Wellcome to bring the price down. And they kept telling us, yeah, you know what, there's not enough people. We're not going to make enough money. And so we wanted to shine a spotlight on them. So we had die-ins. The press was getting tired of our falling down in the street. Who can blame them? And so what we did is we dressed up like stockbrokers, and we made our own little ID pins from the various trading firms so that we could sneak into the New York Stock Exchange before they opened. We went in, and you probably all know that balcony that overlooks the New York Stock Exchange, and they have IPOs go up there, and they ring the bell, everybody's excited. There's an initial public offering of this company. Well, there was not one of those going on that day, so the balcony was empty until we got there. So 5 minutes before the bell rang, we got up on the balcony, we chained ourselves and handcuffed ourselves to the balcony, and 2 minutes before the bell went off, we blew off air horns, and we blew them until they ran out of air. And that was a minute or two past when the bell had gone off. The bell had gone off, but no one heard it. And we stopped trading for about 17 minutes, the only time it's ever happened. And people were so furious. We had a big sign, and pardon my language, if you are of sensitive ear, just mute me for a second. It said, "Fuck your profiteering. Burroughs Wellcome is killing people." And we threw out these fake $100 bills. And this was the first arrest where I was hopeful the police would show up soon, because they were trying to get up on the balcony and kill us. And we didn't have keys. We wanted to make sure that we were standing up there a long time. We had other activists in there taking photographs. They were all, which is, you can't do that at the New York Stock Exchange. They were all caught, and we don't have any photos from inside. And I'm just going to tell you one more act up story. This one did not end up in an arrest, but we were at the International AIDS Conference in Montreal. We took a bus to Montreal to help the Montreal Act Up protest outside. And we had to deal with the police that we would not go in the building. And Montreal was like insistent. You remember, can't go in the building. That's the only rule. We can do out here whatever we want to do. And so the AIDS conference, we're not invited to this. Activists aren't invited. It's all physicians, and no place at the table for us. And so we're out there marching back and forth. And we reached the end of this place, and I'm in the very back. I am not a leader of this group at all, by the way. I am just there willing to get arrested because I own my own business. I own a nightclub. I don't have to explain to my boss why I didn't show up for work the next day. I can just ask someone else with a key to open the place. So I felt it was my duty to get arrested because a lot of people couldn't. So anyway, we're walking outside of the Montreal Convention Center, and we reach the end, and they're like, "Turn around." So now I am in the front, still not a leader, but I'm in front, and I don't know where I'm going. And so I'm walking, and I see an escalator in front of me, and I'm like, start to veer. He goes, "No, let's go on the escalator." I'm like, "Oh, okay." And we go up the escalator, and we end up in the big convention center where the physicians are meeting. And we just keep going, and we take over the stage. And there's a picture of me right there. I'm like Forrest Gump. I had no idea what I was doing, but ended up getting anybody on stage. And then the leaders at this point, who were in the back, have made it to the stage, grabbed the microphones, and they commandeered the AIDS conference. And it was really important. And the stuff they had to say was so important. They were invited to the next one in San Francisco the following year. And that's Peter Staley. He looks so young. He was, and he's older now. I just have to say this. When I was doing ACT UP, I was very interested, but I had no formal education. At this point, I had a high school education and a year of theater, which did not really set me up. And although I was a minor celebrity at my nightclub because I owned a nightclub and it was kind of notorious, they would always stick a camera in my face and a microphone to say something. And I would watch myself and I'm like, I sound like an idiot, because I didn't know as much as these guys that were educated and these men and women who had really done a great job of informing themselves. And I didn't have the skills and the tools, and I vowed to go back to school to do it. And so education is really important to me. This is me. I did find this picture online, getting arrested as part of the group Act Up Rhode Island. We started out as Act Now, and we later called ourselves Act Up because I was complaining to the people who started it that we're not doing anything right away. We don't act now, we act later. So let's call ourselves Act Up like New York does. And we did. So this was put together by some Brown University students. Again, really bright people, really great people. But I added, because I had been arrested a couple of times by now, I added a sense of, more urgency and of actually doing things right away. So we in Act Up Rhode Island were facing this horrible law that made mandatory disclosure of someone's HIV status. It was mandatory under the law, and we were fighting this law and trying to get it rescinded. And the Rhode Island Department of Health would put billboards up all over the state with these numbers to call to get tested. And although we wanted people to get tested, we didn't want them to have their names reported. Hardly any state was doing this at the time. So we would go on the billboards and paint over the phone number. And sometimes we'd paint the number for Connecticut's public health department, where they did anonymous testing. So we called those art projects in the middle of the night. And the Brown students were smart enough to stay away from those. So the local people handled those.
Routine AIDS testing. The members of Act Now Rhode Island, an AIDS public awareness group, occupied the private office of State Health Director Denman Scott. They claim the new AIDS bill will endanger civil liberties and will not help slow the spread of the disease. State police warned the protesters to leave.
We're going to arrest you. You'll be taken up to Lincoln Barracks, at which time be charged, and all go before justice of the peace. And you're going to have at least $20 to get out of jail tonight.
Four
There he is.
demonstrators left, but the other 6 chose to be arrested. They were cheered on by a group of supporters. Those people arrested were charged with obstructing justice. All of them are free at this hour after each posting $20 bail.
Yeah, notorious criminals took $20 to get us out of jail that night. But it shined, again, the spotlight effect was really helpful. And it wasn't long before that law was rescinded. It had nothing to do with us, according to the governor, but it was good it happened. By the way, I forgot to tell you, with Boroughs Welcome, after that particular action, the next day, Boroughs Welcome dropped the price of AZT by 20%. They said it was a coincidence. I was trying to pull this video off of How to Survive a Plague that shows us in Boroughs Welcome's headquarters in North Carolina, where we took over their offices, and we were supposed to smash out their windows and put up a banner, but we couldn't smash out the windows. And we were called the power tools because I brought all these tools with me so that I could barricade us in their offices. I took apart file cabinets and used metal plates to secure the doors. We were planning to be there for a few days to keep doing press releases and talk about the scourge of Boroughs Welcome and how they were profiting at the expense of people who were dying. Not only that, the largest purchaser of AZT was the US government. And so we thought people would be outraged that their tax dollars were going to sheer profit for this company that wasn't even a US company. We were arrested within 6 hours. They took down walls to get us out of there. And luckily for me, 3 of the guys that were there were infected with HIV, and Boroughs Welcome did not want them to spend significant time in jail. We were lucky. Keith Haring, the artist, who was very important at that time in the art world and was very rich, he gave us each $10,000 in traveler's checks so that we could get out of jail that night. And they were all $100 checks. And I was begging them, please let me buy one of these, because it was Keith Haring's signature. But no, we had to give them all back because we got out. So I mentioned I did AIDS, and I also did LGBTQ activism. I organized a couple of busloads of people to go down to Washington, D.C. for the Washington March on Washington back in, I think it was 1987. Yeah. And, Queer Nation starts about this time, the late 80s, where people realized that the tactics of ACT UP were actually working. And so the LGBTQ movement got a bit more adversarial, like a little bit more, active and a lot more, angry. And so it was a big change in the way we did activism. ACT UP is still around. This is from 2017, 30 years into the epidemic, still going. Unfortunately, there's still a need for ACT UP. And some of these guys were the original guys. Other people have joined up as well. But ACT UP is still active in many, many states. There's actually a new ACT UP in Rhode Island as well. Anyway, that's a little history of my activism. Now, I have to stress, I took the lead on a lot of art projects. I took the lead on taking over offices and doing some crazy things. But the people who were the masterminds of ACT UP were really highly educated, really bright people that put it all together. And I had a place, and I think I served an important role, but it certainly wasn't a leadership role. And I don't want to give anybody that impression. But I do believe that we sped up the entire gay rights movement because it showed that gay people were, number one, not afraid to speak out. When I grew up, there were no positive role models who were gay or openly gay, very few anyway. And it was a crime to express your love in just about every state in the union. And so it was very different. And I was thinking today about, it's Pride Month, and we're not having any gay pride parades because, people can't get together. And I was remembering one of my favorite gay pride parades. So we're close to New York, like 3 hours away by car, and you can take a train, you can fly in 20 minutes. So I went to every ACT UP New York meeting I could. And of course, pride parades in New York City are just phenomenal, or I should say fabulous, right? And I would love to go to them. It was wonderful. And we would have a pride parade in Rhode Island. And instead of tens of thousands of people in a parade, we would have fewer than 100. And I can't tell you how difficult that is to do, because the people who show up to watch are not supporters. They are people who want you dead or want to beat you up for whatever reason. It's fun to beat up gay people, apparently. And so the year that ACT UP got involved, ACT UP Rhode Island got involved in the Providence, Rhode Island Gay Pride Parade, we just took it to a whole new level. I always had a car that I spent no more than $100 on because I would paint them, by roller and brush. Rhode Island is home to Rhode Island School of Design. I'd have my artist friends help me paint the car up, and it would last for 6-7 months, and I'd buy a new $100 car. So during this parade, I had 2 of them at the time because one was on its way out. And we took a Sawzall, we took the roofs off of them so we could have convertibles. And we painted things on them that just drove people nuts. We handed out condoms and needle disinfection kits, and it said, one car, and again, close your ears, said, fuck me safely. And the other one says, something about needle safety. The word fuck was involved again. But it was really powerful because it was not okay to be gay during this time. And so, when I think about it, I'm glad we did it. And, I think we laid a lot of groundwork, and, people are still struggling to come out today, and it's really too bad. And so the struggle never ends. And so I'm looking at this new pandemic we have, and the one I've been working on is not finished yet, right? I was 100% involved for a few years, and then I pulled back. I needed to get my own education. So I went back to school, and I decided that, that changing the laws was the way to get things done. And maybe I'm not the best at doing that, but maybe I can train lawyers who can go out there and change laws. And I'm looking at this current pandemic, and it's got some amazing dissimilarities, but some of them are pretty similar. Now, about a year into the AIDS epidemic, people who were being afflicted the most were people of color, which is, happening with the coronavirus as well, disproportionately affected by the disease. And we were doing street outreach, and we were mostly white guys from the 1980s, and we had to learn about other cultures. And one thing we had to do was, in the Hispanic community, men who were having sex with other men did not identify as gay. They were straight. They just were having sex with other men. So when we said gay sex, you have to protect yourself. They're like, oh, I'm okay. I don't need that. I'm not having gay sex. And so we had to shift our focus for that. And we had to, you know, we had to include people of color, not just like, oh, you can join us, but we had to seek out people of color to join us because we did not look like a group someone would want to be involved with. And it was difficult for especially men of color to come out at that time. They had a double whammy going on for them. And at first, there weren't many women involved as well. And we reached out, and our sisters that stepped up were absolutely amazing. And by the end of the first year in ACT UP, we didn't have gender parity, but it was pretty amazing how fast people joined. There's if you watch the movie How to Survive a Plague, you'll see these women who just did amazing things to forward the movement and to help ameliorate people's suffering. It was just really incredible. So groups that are disproportionately affected, it continues today. Now, I remember when we were doing all of this, a lot of our leaders were talking about what really worked during the civil rights movement of the 60s. And, you know, we tried to emulate some of those tactics that were fantastic in moving the needle forward. Unfortunately, the needle got stuck there for quite a while, but at least there was no more legalized segregation. And, you know, the Jim Crow laws were out. However, we saw that at this point, racism and discriminatory practices go underground. And, you know, that's what we're fighting nowadays. And so as much as I hate the current, you know, I'll just say it, the current administration's approach to these things and the current climate where, you know, we make believe we're colorblind so that we can, you know, say, oh, I didn't have any part of that. I think people today are finally realizing it's all of our problem. And it just gladdens my heart to see people actually doing things and getting together. So anyway, that's a little bit of rambling there. Let me.
No, that's good. And if I first think, President McGrath, could I ask you to stop sharing your screen so we can blow everybody's photos up a little bit?
Yes,
that'd be great.
Sorry.
And as we do that, you know, I think in today's current climate and the activism that's going on, people are waiting to say, okay, what is going to tip the government, or what's going to tip, you know, our society to make the necessary change, whether it's about policing or whatever the earmark might be. When you go back to your ACT UP days earlier on and during the arrest, did you find a time when you felt like, okay, we're starting to hit a point where they're starting to pay more attention? Was it the Wall Street situation? Where did you kind of say, yep, I'm in this for the long haul, I feel like we're making a difference? You know, was there a pivot point for you?
Well, yes and no. So in the beginning, just dropping dead in the street was enough to get the spotlight. It was enough for people to talk about your issues. It's not enough for them to say you block traffic. That just makes people angry. You've got to get the message out. And the message is the government is falling down on the job. The message is people are profiteering off of people's misery. And so getting the message is important. But what happened is the minute we get there, we have to keep upping the ante. And so nonviolent civil disobedience just went so far. People got tired of seeing us do this. And so when we started doing things like taking over the New York Stock Exchange, that wasn't within the parameters of nonviolent civil disobedience. And we knew going in that we might not get out of jail that day. We might actually get those charges to stick. Luckily, that never did happen to me. The most I ever spent in jail was 2 days. But when we went to Burroughs Welcome in North Carolina, that was definitely criminal activity. We were trespassing. We took over some offices. We were actually, because we asked someone to leave the building, we were charged with kidnapping. And so we could have been there a long time. And if it wasn't for the actions of the drug company not wanting to make martyrs of us, I might still be in jail now, or prison, I should say. But the thing is, we had to keep upping the ante to keep that spotlight. And so I did feel like we were making a difference. And by the way, after that, they dropped the price of AZT another 20%. And it was a coincidence again. We just happened to do our activities and our protests on the day before they were announcing a drop in the drug price, which is unbelievable.
Yeah. I don't know if this is a fair question, but can you link up the latest Supreme Court decision on LGBTQ rights and abilities to kind of what you were doing back in the 80s? Do you see a lineage there?
You know, I look at this and, you know, I'm excited that the Supreme Court ruled in that way, but it's a pretty narrow ruling, right? It's interpreting Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. It's not saying gay people deserve to have a job. It's just saying, well, you say you can't discriminate on the basis of sex, and so you can't say a woman can have sex with another man, but a man can't. It's very limited, because if Congress wanted to, Congress could go ahead and write new laws, and that would be the end of it, because it's a textualist interpretation of that particular part of the Title VII. So I love it, but I don't think there's going to be enough people in Congress, especially after this November's election, I'm hoping, that are going to be willing to legislate the ability to deny people a job based upon their sexual orientation. Because in about half the states, it was perfectly legal to do just that. When I was in law school, my summers I interned for the Human Rights Campaign, which is a gay and lesbian activist group, political group. Not political. What are they? I don't know what to call them. Definitely, they try to get legislation changed. They're a lobbying group. It was called the Human Rights Campaign Fund back then, and I worked with them during the summers. And Howard didn't have a formal relationship with them, but Georgetown did. And Kai Feldblum was an amazing clinical professor who took me under her wing, and she let me help at the Georgetown clinic because I was involved with the HRCF at the time. And this was 1995, and we were trying to get the Employment Non-Discrimination Act passed, and we never got more than like 7 or 8 senators or a couple dozen Congress people to sign on to it. But we kept plugging at it year after year after year. All we're asking is that we not get fired for the sheer fact that you're gay, lesbian, and we weren't even talking transgender then. As a matter of fact, Human Rights Campaign decided to exclude transgender from it. They thought it was asking too much. And I became very familiar with this group called the Transgender Menace. And Phyllis Fry, who was going to law school at the time, she would call me every day and say, "You have got to get transgender back in." I said, "I don't know if you know who I am. I am an intern here. I'm not even making minimum wage. I don't have any say. My job is to put together a compendium of people across the country who were fired for being gay." And I would read these stories and I'd be like, "Oh, it's so sad every day." And there were some big offenders that, if you worked at Cracker Barrel and you said something positive about gay people, you were fired. And so the Transgender Menace was just harassing the crap out of me. And they would show up at our events and they would shout us down. And it dawned on me, they were using my own act up tactics against me. And they were right. They were completely right. And Phyllis Fry became a lawyer in Texas. Phyllis Fry became a judge in Texas. And she kept up a really robust practice helping people who are disadvantaged, not just trans people, but people of color and gay and lesbian people as well. Very interesting story to me.
I want to encourage folks to ask questions too in the chat. I want to go back to the concept of you felt like when you're in the midst of your activist days, particularly, that you had to keep upping the ante to kind of get the attention that was necessary to affect change. What does that look like in present day relative to the anti-racism efforts that are going on? I mean, crystal ball it a little bit. I mean, people are calling for police reform, defunding police. Where do you see this going? Just if you have a comment about that.
Yeah. So I have no crystal ball, clearly. When I buy real estate, I buy high, sell low, that kind of thing. Not good at forecasting those types of things, but I see very similar things. So I see, people out there earnestly protesting and trying to affect change through changing people's minds and hearts. I see other people there that's just fed up. By all means necessary, right? I'm going to do what I have to get your attention because you're not listening. So I think it's a mix of all of those things, and I think we're going to continue to see, very civil actions and very, violent reactions to a very violent problem. And again, I'm not condoning that, but I'm just saying, how can you not expect that? And I think we're going to see more of that until we see some substantial change.
So the looting, the destruction of property, is that the category you put in that?
And that's the extreme, and there's stuff in the middle as well.
Sure.
I'm hoping to see some, civil and not so civil disobedience along the way. It's very effective. It changes people's minds. I find that, people who don't want to listen to you, if you're willing to put yourself in harm's way, put yourself in jail, people are going to listen to you a little closer. Like, wait a minute now, what do you have to say that you're willing to go to jail for? And I still think it's an important tactic. But once you start using it, you got to, unfortunately, up that ante a little bit.
When did you make the decision to go to law school? Like, and in what context? Obviously, you chose Howard because I've heard you say that you wanted to put yourself in an environment that's different from you. I think that's how you said it exactly.
Well, so, I really felt so ignorant. I'm seriously, armed with a high school education and a few acting lessons is not the ideal public health background. And I was really interested in public health, and I was so mad at the government and our laws and the way they fostered the ability of HIV disease to really just kill off like my entire cohort pretty much. And so when I went to undergrad, finally, I wasn't thinking law. I was thinking the law's effect on people's behavior. So I was a social psych major, and I applied to PhD programs around the country, and I saw a lot of them. They were JD PhD programs. Like, wow, that makes sense. And Howard was one of the ones that had that, and I'm just like, I read about Howard, and it talks about Thurgood Marshall. He went there. They actually, the lawyers that worked on all the cases that led up to Brown versus Board of Education, they did a lot of their planning there. It sounded just like that's where I want to be. These are people I can learn from to, be a better activist in the future. And when I still wasn't planning on being a lawyer, to be honest with you, but my very first year of law school was just so exciting. And, I loved it. I loved everything about it. And I did pretty well. And so it's not very cool to do this, but I dropped out of the PhD program right away. And they were very mad because, you get a stipend for being the PhD candidate and all that stuff. So it's kind of little sketchy there, but it's a decision I've never looked back on. I just love the law so much. And I didn't know this is what I wanted to do. But while I'm in law school, I'm still doing the activist stuff. And I'm very concerned about, what's going on with the pandemic. And I start hanging out with these residents, medical residents, who are very similarly minded. And they're all talking about going to public health school. I'm like, what, you're an MD and you're going to go back to school? I mean, why would you do that? And they said, we treat individuals, and that's great. And people need to be treated, but we also want to help the populations. And so really good friend of mine, he's an anesthesiologist. As soon as he finished his residency, he did an MPH at Harvard Public Health. And I just could not believe just how amazing public health was. It's like law. It's in every facet of society. You can be a public health lawyer and shut down restaurants that don't keep their kitchens clean, or you can, have to enforce an order of quarantine and lock people up that refuse to do it. You can enforce also. It's so broad. It's as broad as the law itself. And I was fascinated with what he was studying. And so I made up my mind that after a couple of years of practice, I was going to go back to public health school, because that's why I went to school to begin with. I didn't go to school to go to law school. I went to school to help, shape society, to help change people's mind, whether it's through the law or public health. And so I went to public health school, and it was just fantastic. And that's when I realized that I actually liked, it wasn't just a means to an end. I loved being in school, and I loved being a student. And so those of you out there who are students, you can be a student for life by actually becoming a law professor. It's the best job. Don't tell everybody. Everybody will want to do it. So that's I kind of backed into it. You know, it wasn't what.
And then you found your way in actually in legal education and being, now where you're sitting now, but you were, how did that occur for you? I mean, you worked at the firm for a short time.
So my goal, my plan was this. This is my hierarchy. I may be wrong. Pardon me if I insult anybody, but I thought the best public health schools were Harvard and Johns Hopkins. And so I said, my first, in my second year in the firm, I'll apply to those schools. Probably won't get in. I didn't have a really great pedigree at the time. I said, but if I don't get in, then the next year I'm going to go to the next tier. I'm going to go to these three schools. And somehow I got into both of them. Now I will say this. I didn't tell you this before, but I talked to one of my professors who was on the admissions committee. He said, what put me over the top for you was your ridiculous story in Guatemala. And I didn't finish part of my story. When we were in, I was talking about being culturally sensitive and learning to adapt to different groups and making sure we include people of color, not just expect them to want to join us. And the most important lesson there, of course, is we are so much stronger when we get together with allies than we are by ourselves. So why would you want to exclude anybody? But anyway, I digress again, as is my want. But I was doing street outreach to men who didn't identify as gay and to people who were using works, people who were shooting drugs. And a lot of them did not speak English, especially in New York, but even in Rhode Island. And so I heard about this school in Guatemala that you could go down there and for about $60 a week, you go to classes 40 hours a week, you live with a family, you have no contact with English whatsoever, and you can pick up enough to be dangerous on the street in just a couple of months. And I'm like, yes. At this point, I'm fed up with smelling like cigarette smoke and the nightclubs, just more of a hassle. It doesn't feel important anymore. I gave it to my employees. I gave it to them. I said, if you can make it run, make it run. And I went to Guatemala for a couple of months and I came back and my Spanish was not so great, but I was doing okay. And I decided to go back for a little while longer. And when I went back, I went to a new school. And on the fifth day, instead of going to classes again, that was one-on-one instruction. And it was $60 a week with room and board with a family. Unbelievable. I think it's almost $200 a week now, which is still an incredible bargain. Anyway, when I went back at this school on Friday, you didn't have classes. You had to go to the local hospital and talk with people there who were stuck there. And my Spanish was better. I had a lot of vocabulary, but my pronunciation, as anyone who speaks Spanish, like my husband, will tell you, is horrible. It's horrifying. And I work on it. It's terrible. And so I'm in the hospital. I'm like, me, think now, weather good, how you like this people. I'm in the hospital. I'm dying. And I got to listen to this crap. People were not really enjoying my company. I could tell. And I'm just sitting there trying to think of what to say that might ameliorate this person's existence, because the hospitals that I was going to were not in major cities. They were really more like hospice, a place where you went to die. And here's this American just boring me to tears, like just praying for death. I'm sure of it. And I noticed that the nurse was going down the line of beds and was injecting everybody. And she was using the same needle. She was wiping it with a gauze thing. And I'm like, oh. And so I went to the director of the hospital and I said, the whole reason I'm down here is to help people disinfect their works, and he was like, oh, crazy American, AIDS, that's an American problem. It will never be a global issue. It's just Americans are so excited. I said, but this is the most perfect transmission method you're using. Blood directly into someone's bloodstream. You got to at least think about it. He's like, and I was obsessed. I was sure that I had something here and we needed to nip this practice in the bud. And it turns out, at least where I was in Antigua, that people preferred to take their drugs with a needle. I mean, vitamins, aspirin, anything gets in the bloodstream quicker, it's better. But most people couldn't afford single-use needles. So I went to every group, that I could think of that could help me, and no one would help me. And I grew up in a Catholic household. And again, I'm not trying to make anybody miserable. I'm not a really good Catholic. Let's just say that. I kind of left the church, and I had nothing to do with the Catholic Church for a long time. And the only people that would listen to me was Catholic Charities in Antigua, Guatemala. and they hooked me up with some medical students from Guatemala City, and it's an hour away. And they were all in about going around and giving disinfection kits. And disinfection kits is a little bottle of bleach and a little bottle that you can put water in so you get the right amounts. And it takes 2 or 3 minutes, and will make those needles safe to use again or use with another person. And so we did that. Now, that sounds like a great thing. And this is the story that got me into Harvard Public Health School. Sounds like a great idea, but if your goal was to learn Spanish, not the right way to go, because those medical students wanted to sharpen their English skills. So double-edged sword. So yeah.
We're getting close to our time, and again, if anybody has any last questions, talk to me about, is there a significance in you being one of only, I think, a couple gay deans in legal education that we know of?
So, I know like 4 or 5, and it sounds pretty good, but we're talking 200 or so schools. I don't know how well we're represented, really. I know I was shocked to find out recently that in the legal profession, gays and lesbians are underrepresented. I thought for sure we're overrepresented because of who I see and who I know, but it's not true. I don't really think much of it. I think I'll say it. I think we really need to diversify the profession. And to be honest with you, people don't see me as diversifying a faculty. They see me as another white guy. And that's fair. I mean, we have too many white guys at the helm of law schools, right? I do think I bring a different perspective. And, my background has, I think, just fits so well in with Western Michigan University Cooley Law School. I think the things that we're doing this year because we want to, and the things that we're doing this year because it's clear we have to, right? COVID has changed the way we do things. The whole, it's not just George Floyd. All of the recent excesses by the police have shown us we can't just do business as usual. So it's a really difficult time to do this job, but it's also a fantastic time to really affect true and lasting change. So as much as it exhausts me, I say this altogether too often. I apologize to everybody. I do love challenges, but stop. Enough challenges. But at the end of the day, I feel really good about what we're doing here. I mean, I'll say it again and again. I have I'm one of the luckiest deans, if not the luckiest dean in the country, a faculty that's so willing to do things. And our response and our to the racial unrest has been second to none. I see what other schools are doing. Schools are doing amazing things, but I think we're doing great stuff, and there's more to come.
Excellent. We do actually have a Professor Kimball is with us tonight, and he has a thought or two about Bostock. And Joe, I don't know if you wanted to comment or ask a question or.
Please comment.
Yeah.
Am I unmuted?
Yep.
President McGrath, that's an amazing life story, I have to say.
It's not over yet.
We're glad to have you here. We were all, of course, wildly happy about Bostock, and we were completely amazed that Gorsuch wrote the majority opinion. Yeah. But we shouldn't think, and he was able to do it within the confines of strict textualism, right? And of course, Alito went apoplectic in dissent because he said that's not what sex meant in 1964, whether Title VII was passed. See, that's so. And he had in his appendix, he had like every 1964 dictionary in his appendix that went on for dozens of pages with dictionary pages, which is what textualists usually do. They resort to the dictionary. But I mean, we need to temper our enthusiasm, because nobody should think that Gorsuch has flipped liberal or that Roberts has flipped liberal. I mean, they were able to do it within the confines of strict textualism, but I'm afraid that we've got some serious disappointments down the road with the next opinion from the United States Supreme Court where there are social issues like this involved. It was interesting that Gorsuch didn't cite dictionaries for the definition of sex, but he cited a dictionary for the definition of discrimination, as if we needed a dictionary definition in any of this stuff. I'm writing about that at the moment, by the way. But so I'm thinking affirmative action. Beware of what's coming down the road for affirmative action. And some, again, a lot of the other issues. I mean, this was a welcome decision, of course, but yeah, nobody should think that.
I feel the same way. My
stripes.
Yeah, no, my joy is tempered by all of that. I just feel like it could be all lost really quickly. So I'm happy, of course, but I'm still uneasy. Thanks for clarifying those points.
Yeah, Professor Kimball, we appreciate that, and it sounds like a topic for an upcoming conversation.
I think people thought that's what we were going to talk about tonight, and I apologize.
But President McGrath, we do appreciate you being here. We thank all of our guests as well, obviously, and particularly those who are future law students potentially. Join us next time. We will be joining you on July 23rd for our next conversation. So we're going to take a little bit of a break. In the meantime, let's keep each other safe and take care of one another. Have a good night, everybody.